There is a moment in every person's life when the truth can no longer be ignored. The identity you've been carrying is not the identity you were born to live. It is a construction built from expectations, shaped by other people's comfort, influenced by the roles you were taught to play, and reinforced by the fear of disappointing those around you. This identity often becomes so familiar that you confuse it with your true nature. You tell yourself, "This is who I am," even when your heart whispers, "This is who I had to become to survive." Choosing yourself shatters that illusion. When you finally choose yourself, the old identity begins to crack, fall apart, and dissolve. Not because it was wrong, but because it was borrowed. It was a costume you wore to earn approval, to avoid conflict, to feel safe, or to belong somewhere, anywhere. You didn't realize how heavy it was until you started putting it down. Your old identity is built on compromises you no longer want to make. It is made of the promises you made to others at the expense of promises you never made to yourself. It is shaped by the times you silenced your intuition to be agreeable, stayed in situations that drained you, or molded yourself into a version of you that allowed other people to feel secure. It was a survival mechanism, not a reflection of your soul. Choosing yourself is the moment those survival strategies stop being necessary. It begins quietly. You notice that certain things no longer feel right. You start questioning routines, beliefs, relationships, and expectations that you once accepted without hesitation. Something within you says, "I can't keep doing this," not because you are weak, but because you are awakening. You begin to see that the identity you've been living is a cage disguised as a comfort zone. Choosing yourself disrupts everything that depends on your self-abandonment. It challenges the old identity at its foundation. The people who benefited from that identity feel the shift before you fully understand it. Suddenly, you're not as available, not as compliant, not as willing to sacrifice your inner peace for external harmony. The old identity was predictable, but choosing yourself introduces unpredictability, authenticity, and boundaries. And boundaries are the first crack in the old identity. Boundaries say, "I matter too." Boundaries say, "My needs are real." Boundaries say, "I will no longer disappear," so others can feel comfortable. The moment you choose yourself, you begin reclaiming parts of you that were buried. The dreams you postponed, the talents you hid, the opinions you muted, the intuition you ignored, they begin returning like lost pieces of your soul. The old identity cannot hold these new pieces, and so it begins to crumble. You realize how much of your life was shaped by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of hurting others, fear of being misunderstood. Choosing yourself does not eliminate those fears. It simply stops allowing them to dictate your direction. You learn to act despite fear, not in obedience to it. With every small act of self-loyalty, the old identity grows weaker. The people around you may react. Some will celebrate your growth because they love the real you. Others will resist it because they only knew how to relate to the version of you that served them. Transformation forces others to confront their own stagnation, and not everyone is ready for that. But the reactions of others no longer define who you are, because your relationship with yourself is becoming stronger than their expectations. Choosing yourself also requires grieving the person you once were, not because that version of you was bad, but because it was incomplete. You outgrew it. You evolved beyond it. You are shedding a psychological skin that cannot grow with you. This shedding is uncomfortable, sometimes painful, but it is necessary for renewal. Each layer that falls away, you feel lighter. You're more connected to an inner voice you once ignored. That voice becomes your compass, guiding you toward choices aligned with your truth rather than your conditioning. Your identity shifts from external validation to internal authenticity. The old identity was a reflection of who you needed to be for others. The new identity is a reflection of who you choose to be for yourself. Choosing yourself is ultimately the birth of your true self. It is the beginning of a life lived from the inside out, not the outside in. It is the quiet revolution that changes everything. Not because you become someone new, but because you finally return to who you were always meant to be. There comes a time in life when the constant noise of the world becomes too overwhelming, too chaotic, and too disconnected from who you really are. For years you may have lived according to the voices of others, parents, society, friends, partners, teachers, culture, tradition, and even strangers who felt entitled to shape your path. Their voices often carried more weight than your own, not because they were right, but because your inner voice had not yet learned to speak with authority. Your inner voice begins as a whisper. It's fragile, easily drowned out, and often dismissed as irrational. You fear listening to it because it seems too unfamiliar compared to the loud, repetitive messages from the outside world. The world tells you who to be, how to act, what to pursue, and what to avoid. The world rewards compliance far more than authenticity, so you learn to silence the quiet truth within you to gain acceptance from those around you. But something begins to shift when you choose yourself. The inner voice that once trembled gains strength. It becomes clearer, more consistent, more persistent. You start noticing that your inner voice has always been guiding you. It was you who kept turning down the volume. And the more you listen, the more you begin to understand that every answer you seek has been inside you, waiting for the noise to fade. External noise is loud but shallow. It demands immediate attention, yet offers no real guidance. It creates anxiety without providing direction. The noise is made of opinions, judgments, comparisons, and projections. People tell you what they think you should do, often based on their own fears or limitations. The noise convinces you that you are never enough, not successful enough, not attractive enough, not capable enough, not worthy enough. This external chorus shapes your identity until you forget that your inner voice even exists. But when you finally allow yourself to listen, truly listen, you discover that your inner voice is not chaotic. It is grounded. It is wise. It is honest. It is the part of you untouched by conditioning, untouched by fear, untouched by the expectations of others. It speaks in a language that resonates deeper than logic. It speaks through intuition, through feelings, through sudden clarity, through subtle discomfort, through an unexplainable knowing. Your inner voice does not shout, it reveals. As you choose yourself more consistently, your inner voice becomes your primary source of direction. You stop asking, what will people think? And start asking, what feels true to me? This shift changes everything. You realize that external noise is reactive while your inner voice is intentional. External noise wants you to fit in, while your inner voice wants you to grow. External noise tells you to conform, while your inner voice tells you to expand. External noise demands sacrifice of self, while your inner voice demands loyalty to self. This transformation is not instant. It unfolds gradually. At first, listening to your inner voice feels rebellious, it feels risky, it feels like you're betraying the script you were taught to follow. But eventually you see that ignoring your inner voice was the true betrayal. Betrayal of your purpose, your desires, your authenticity, your mental peace, and your emotional truth. The more you listen, the louder it becomes. Your inner voice becomes a guiding force, a compass that never lies. It helps you identify relationships that no longer serve you. It exposes environments that drain your energy. It warns you when you're abandoning yourself again. It nudges you toward opportunities aligned with your soul rather than your fear. It encourages decisions that honor your growth rather than decisions that maintain your comfort. And with each decision guided by your inner voice, your confidence grows. You develop an inner authority that external opinions can no longer dominate. You stop feeling the need to defend your choices because you no longer doubt them. You stop seeking permission to follow your truth because you realize the only permission you ever needed was your own. The world around you may continue to speak, judge, or criticize, but the volume of that noise no longer holds the same power. You begin to see that most people speak from their own unhealed experiences, their own insecurities, their own narratives. Their voices no longer define you because you found something far more powerful, your own inner clarity. When your inner voice becomes louder than external noise, you stop living a life of reaction and begin living a life of intention. You start making choices based on alignment rather than expectation. You realize that peace is not found in silence from others, but in connection with yourself. And as this inner voice strengthens, it becomes the anchor that keeps you grounded, the truth that keeps you centered, and the guidance that keeps you moving toward the life that was always meant for you. When you finally make the decision to prioritize yourself, the world around you does not stay silent. People react. Some react with admiration, some with confusion, and others with resistance. Not because your choice is wrong, but because your choice disrupts the unspoken agreements that once shaped your relationships, your identity, and your place in the social hierarchy. Self-priority acts like a mirror, reflecting back to people the ways in which they relied on your self-sacrifice, your silence, your compliance, or your emotional labor. For years, you might have been the one who said yes, even when you wanted to say no. You might have been the one who bent, adjusted, absorbed, and accommodated everyone else's needs before your own. Many people grew comfortable with that version of you. They learned how to lean on your kindness, your empathy, your availability, and your lack of boundaries. Your selflessness became their stability. Your self-neglect became their convenience. When you begin choosing yourself, that entire system starts to shift. People react because you are no longer predictable. You are no longer the one they can call at any moment without considering your time. You are no longer the one who absorbs emotional burdens without question. You are no longer the person who avoids conflict at all cost. You are no longer the one who sacrifices your needs to protect someone else's comfort. Your self-priority introduces boundaries, and boundaries force people to meet a new version of you, one they didn't prepare for. Some people adjust, some resist, some quietly distance themselves, some become defensive or even offended, not because you're doing something wrong, but because your evolution threatens the dynamic that once benefited them. People who genuinely care for you will eventually understand. They'll notice your growth. They will respect your boundaries even if it takes them time to adjust. They will celebrate your self-respect rather than feel threatened by it. These are the relationships that become stronger because of your transformation. These are the people who love you, not the version of you that was convenient for them. But others will not respond this way. Some will guilt you, attempting to pull you back into old patterns. You've changed. You're being selfish. You used to be so supportive. You're different now. These statements aren't reflections of your character. They're reflections of their discomfort. They're used as psychological anchors, meant to drag you back into roles that kept you small, quiet, and accessible. Some people will test your new boundaries, pushing to see if you'll bend the way you used to. They might ignore your limits, challenge your decisions, or pretend not to hear the word no. Their reactions reveal how dependent they were on your lack of self-priority. Instead of adapting, they try to return you to the old identity that required your constant self-abandonment. There will also be people who distance themselves without confrontation. They won't argue or guilt-trip you. They simply drift away because your new strength highlights their unwillingness to grow. Your self-priority exposes where they are still stuck. And rather than face their own stagnation, they retreat from the version of you that no longer fits their comfort zone. Some may become intimidated by your self-respect. They were used to your silence, your softness, your compliance. The moment you begin making decisions that honor your worth, they don't know how to interact with you anymore. Your confidence invalidates the dynamics they relied on, dynamics that allowed them to lead, dominate, or take advantage of your gentleness. In contrast, there are people who respond with curiosity. They ask, "What changed?" Or "How did you learn to put yourself first?" They see your transformation not as a threat, but as inspiration. Your self-priority becomes permission for them to do the same in their own lives. They recognize that your boundaries are not walls. They are invitations for healthier connection. Prioritizing yourself also changes how you see people. You start noticing who truly supports your growth and who only supports your convenience. You begin to see who respects your time, your energy, your emotional capacity, and who expects access to you without taking responsibility for the impact they have on your life. You stop confusing familiarity with loyalty. You stop confusing obligation with love. Self-priority reveals the truth about relationships, and that truth isn't always comfortable, but it is necessary. When the people around you react, they reveal more about their intentions than your decisions ever could. Their responses become a map of who belongs in your next chapter and who belongs in your past. Life starts aligning with your authentic path. 700 words. When you finally choose to live from your truth instead of your conditioning, life begins to rearrange itself in ways you never imagined possible. Authenticity is not just a mindset, it is an energetic shift. It is the moment when your inner world becomes so aligned, so honest, and so grounded that your outer world has no choice but to reflect that alignment back to you. What once felt confusing starts making sense. What once felt heavy begins to lighten. What once felt forced begins to flow. Life becomes less about trying to control every outcome and more about allowing what is meant for you to find you. Living inauthentically creates resistance. You feel it as anxiety, frustration, restlessness, or a constant sense of being out of place. You pursue goals that don't feel like yours. You stay in environments that drain you. You hold relationships that keep you small. You choose paths that were chosen for you by expectations rather than intuition. The misalignment builds silently, manifesting as emotional exhaustion or a feeling that life keeps pushing against you instead of supporting you. But the moment you return to authenticity, everything begins to shift. Authenticity means being honest about what you want, what you feel, what you believe, and who you are becoming. It requires dismantling the identity you created to survive and embracing the one that reflects your inner truth. This inner alignment becomes a magnet. People, opportunities, ideas, and paths begin to appear as if they were waiting just for you. Nothing truly aligned with you could appear while you were busy living someone else's life. Your clarity becomes a signal. The universe responds to clarity. It reflects what you embody, not what you pretend to be. When you finally honor your intuition, life begins guiding you instead of resisting you. You start attracting situations that resonate with your values instead of situations that test your limits. You gravitate toward people who understand your journey rather than those who question your growth. Life becomes less about forcing and more about allowing. This alignment shows up in subtle ways at first. You may notice that conversations feel more meaningful. You find yourself drawn to new interests or inspired by ideas that once seemed impossible. You encounter people whose presence feels nourishing rather than draining. You begin to experience small synchronicities, unexpected opportunities, coincidences, signs, or moments of clarity that guide you further along your authentic path. You also begin releasing what no longer aligns with you. Old habits fall away without a battle. Outdated dreams lose their appeal. Relationships that once felt essential begin to reveal their limitations. Environments that once felt familiar start to feel suffocating. It is not that you are rejecting your past, you are simply outgrowing it. Authenticity naturally dissolves anything built on fear or false identity. As you align with who you truly are, your decisions become simpler. You stop making choices based on guilt or obligation and begin making choices based on resonance. You prioritize what gives you peace instead of what gives you approval. You trust your intuition even when you cannot explain it. You follow what feels right even if it feels unfamiliar. Alignment also brings a deeper sense of timing. You begin understanding that not everything needs to happen immediately. You stop chasing what is not ready and stop forcing what is not meant for you. You learn to trust that what is aligned will arrive without manipulation, pressure, or desperation. Your pace becomes intentional instead of frantic. Life rearranges itself around your authenticity because authenticity is stability. When your internal world becomes consistent, your external world becomes coherent. You start recognizing that every shift, every ending, every new beginning was designed to move you toward a life that reflects your soul rather than your survival patterns. You realize that alignment does not mean perfection. It does not mean the absence of challenges. It means the presence of purpose. It means the challenges you face are meaningful, growth-oriented, and aligned with your evolution. You no longer feel lost in your struggles because you understand they are shaping the path you are consciously choosing. You feel guided rather than scattered, connected rather than confused, empowered rather than overwhelmed. Your authentic path becomes a place where your strengths naturally flourish, your creativity expands, and your inner peace becomes non-negotiable. You no longer feel like you are fighting against life. You feel like you are moving with it. Every decision you make creates a ripple. Every act of self-honesty strengthens the foundation beneath your feet. With each step toward authenticity, life responds. It opens new doors, reveals new insights, and clears away what is no longer aligned with who you are becoming. Choosing yourself creates unshakable inner freedom. 700 words. Choosing yourself is not just an act of self-love. It is an act of liberation. It is the moment when you reclaim your life from the expectations, projections, and demands that once dictated your every move. For years you may have been taught, both directly and subtly, that your value lies in how much you give, how much you sacrifice, how much you endure, and how willing you are to put yourself second. This conditioning creates a mental prison where your worth is measured by everything except your own inner truth. But when you choose yourself, that prison begins to crumble. A new form of freedom emerges, quiet, powerful, and unshakable. Inner freedom begins with permission. Permission to feel what you feel, to want what you want, to walk the path that resonates with your soul, rather than the one molded by obligation. This permission is revolutionary because it reverses the pattern of placing everyone else's comfort above your own. It breaks the cycle of seeking external validation and replaces it with inner trust. The moment you give yourself permission to honor your needs, you take the first step toward a freedom that no one can take from you. Choosing yourself means stepping out of the roles you were assigned, roles that kept you small, compliant, or silent. You stop being the fixer, the pleaser, the rescuer, the peacemaker, the dependable one who carries emotional burdens that were never meant for you. You stop bending yourself into shapes that hide your truth, just to avoid making others uncomfortable. You stop living a life that fits into someone else's idea of who you should be. This shift is not sudden. It unfolds slowly, like sunlight rising over a dark landscape. At first, you feel a mix of relief and discomfort. Relief because you are finally listening to yourself. Discomfort because you are disrupting a system built on your self-neglect. But with each act of choosing yourself, your confidence grows. Your inner voice becomes stronger. Your sense of self becomes clearer. You realize that freedom was never about escaping the world. It was about returning to yourself. Inner freedom is the absence of internal conflict. It means you no longer betray yourself to gain acceptance. You no longer silence your truth to maintain peace. You no longer negotiate your boundaries to keep relationships intact. You stop apologizing for prioritizing your mental, emotional, and spiritual health. You recognize that peace built on self-abandonment is not peace at all. It is suppression disguised as harmony. With self-priority comes a profound shift in how you relate to others. You begin to see where you once tolerated disrespect, manipulation, or emotional dependency. You understand that choosing yourself does not mean rejecting others. It means refusing to reject yourself. You no longer accept relationships that drain you, environments that confine you, or expectations that suffocate your authenticity. This clarity creates space for healthier connections, honest communication, and mutual respect. Inner freedom also changes how you handle fear. Loses its grip because you are no longer living for approval. You stop fearing judgment because you no longer judge yourself for choosing differently. You stop fearing rejection because you no longer abandon yourself in order to be accepted. You stop fearing failure because your worth is no longer tied to performance. You begin to trust your inner compass more than external noise. You begin to value your intuition more than others' opinions. You begin to understand that your life is your responsibility, and no one else has the authority to define its direction. With this freedom comes peace, not the fragile peace that depends on external circumstances, but a rooted peace that comes from knowing you are living in alignment with yourself. You feel grounded even when everything around you is uncertain. You feel steady even when others misunderstand your path. You feel whole even when you stand alone. Choosing yourself also ignites a deeper sense of purpose. When you break free from expectations, you finally have space to explore your real desires, dreams you once suppressed, talents you ignored, passions you abandoned. You realize that authenticity and purpose are intertwined. You cannot live your purpose while living someone else's identity. The more you align with your truth, the more life aligns with you. Inner freedom is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not a declaration. It is a feeling, quiet, expansive, and deeply stabilizing. It is the understanding that no matter what happens outside you, what remains inside you is strong, clear, and untouchable. It is the realization that you are no longer governed by external forces, but by inner clarity, inner strength, and inner truth.